There was a time when more than half of the professionals on the PGA Tour were swinging clubs made by the same company. Not Titleist, not Callaway. A name that today most golfers under 50 have never even heard of. And the strange part is, this company didn't start out making golf clubs at all. It started out making wooden feet. Stick around, because the story of how a small shoe factory in Ohio became the biggest name in golf and then quietly vanished is one of the more remarkable rise and fall stories in American manufacturing. Our story begins in 1829 in Dayton, Ohio. Two brothers, Archibald and Ziba Crawford, opened a small operation making hand-carved wooden lasts. For those unfamiliar, a last is a foot-shaped wooden form that shoemakers use to shape and repair shoes. It sounds simple, almost forgettable. But the Crawfords had a trick up their sleeve. They developed a special lathe that could carve these wooden forms faster and more precisely than anyone else in the business. At the time, they were the only company doing this kind of work west of the Allegheny Mountains. Business boomed. Over the following decades, the company took on new partners. In the 1870s, a man named John MacGregor joined the firm. In the 1880s, Edward Canby came aboard as well. By 1897, the company had a new name, Crawford, MacGregor, and Canby, and it was about to stumble into a business it never planned on entering. Here is where the story gets interesting. Golf was still a fairly new game in America at the time, imported from Scotland and just starting to catch on with the wealthy. Legend has it that Edward Canby, on a trip abroad, was introduced to the sport and came away thinking about his own factory floor back in Dayton. His workers were skilled woodcarvers, and business slowed down during certain seasons. What if that same lathe technology used to carve shoe lasts could be used to carve golf club heads instead? It turned out to be one of the great business hunches in American manufacturing history. There is another version of the story too, one passed down among golf historians. A Scottish-born golf professional named Robert White, one of the founders of what would later become the PGA of America, is said to have shown the company just how well their shoe lathes could shape a golf club head. Whichever version is true, the company soon settled on persimmon wood for its club heads. Persimmon is a dense hardwood, part of the ebony family, that held up beautifully to the punishment of striking a golf ball again and again, far better than the beech and dogwood most manufacturers had relied on for centuries. The very first persimmon club heads were sold in 1896. Just 3 years later, the company was shipping 100,000 of them a year to Great Britain, the very birthplace of golf. Think about that for a moment. A shoe factory in landlocked Ohio was now supplying golf clubs to the country that invented the sport. Because so many of these clubs were headed overseas, the company gave the brand a name that sounded properly Scottish. They called it MacGregor, borrowing from partner John MacGregor's own name. It worked. By 1910, the company was exporting well over 100,000 clubs a year. And MacGregor was fast becoming a household name among golfers on both sides of the Atlantic. The 1920s brought even more innovation. MacGregor became one of the first manufacturers to offer steel-shafted clubs, a major shift away from the traditional hickory shafts golfers had used for generations. In 1922, the company did something no other golf manufacturer had done before. It opened its own private golf course, right on Woodman Drive on the east side of Dayton. Employees played there, but more importantly, it doubled as a live testing ground for new equipment. Every club MacGregor made could be tried and refined right there before it ever reached a store shelf. But the company's fortunes were about to take a dramatic turn, and not for the better, at least not for Dayton. In 1936, Edward Canby died, and the company was sold to the P. Goldsmith Company of Cincinnati. The MacGregor name was kept because, quite simply, it was worth more than Goldsmith's own name in the marketplace. This new ownership brought in a legendary figure named Tommy Armour, along with his talented assistant Tony Penna, to redesign the company's clubs. Penna would go on to recruit some of the biggest names in the sport. In 1939 alone, he signed Jimmy DeMeritt, Byron Nelson, and Ben Hogan. Louise Suggs, one of the founders of the LPGA, also had her name on MacGregor clubs. By the late 1940s and into the 1950s, MacGregor was not just a major player in golf. It was the dominant force. More touring professionals used MacGregor clubs and balls during this stretch than every other brand combined. At its peak, the company claimed that over half of all PGA professionals played its clubs, and it controlled roughly a third of the entire pro shop market nationwide. The company pioneered the idea of the matched set, typically 3 woods and 9 irons designed to work together as a complete system, an idea that changed how golf clubs were sold from that point forward. Behind every one of those sets stood factory workers in Dayton and later Cincinnati, men who had spent years learning to read the grain of a piece of persimmon and shape it by feel as much as by machine. It was slow, exacting work, and for decades it was work that could not easily be copied anywhere else in the country. And yet, this success came at a cost to Dayton itself. After World War II, the company began shifting its operations to Cincinnati, where its new parent company was headquartered. It was the beginning of the end for MacGregor's presence in the city where it all started. The Woodman Drive golf course, once the company's own private proving ground, was eventually sold off. Today, it is the site of a utility company headquarters. Almost nothing remains in Dayton to remind people that this quiet Ohio city was once the birthplace of America's biggest golf brand. The company kept moving. In 1958, it was acquired by the Brunswick Corporation, and manufacturing shifted again. This time to Albany and Covington, Georgia. The new Georgia plant had 4 times the capacity of the old Cincinnati facility. On paper, that sounds like progress, but something was lost along the way. The skilled craftsmen who had spent generations perfecting the art of shaping wood and steel in Dayton and Cincinnati were not there anymore, and quality began to slip. Then came the modern era of golf technology, and MacGregor, once the industry's boldest innovator, suddenly found itself falling behind. When Ping introduced its revolutionary cast iron clubs in 1969, MacGregor didn't respond with its own cast iron, set until 1974, 5 years too late. The company was similarly slow to embrace metal woods and titanium drivers. In 1992, MacGregor released a titanium driver called the T920. It sold around 2,500 units. That same year, Callaway's Great Big Bertha driver sold roughly 250,000 units. The gap tells you everything you need to know about how far MacGregor had fallen behind. Ownership continued to change hands. Jack Nicklaus, long associated with the brand, sold his stake to Amherst Sports in the mid-1980s for a reported $8 million. Amer eventually sold the struggling company in 1997. It changed hands again the following year, and again in the 2000s, briefly reconnecting with its own golf operation in Japan and even partnering with Greg Norman on an apparel line. In 2009, the company was acquired by the retailer Golfsmith. When Golfsmith collapsed into bankruptcy in 2016, MacGregor's remaining assets were absorbed into Dick's Sporting Goods. Through it all, MacGregor clubs were used to win an astonishing 59 major championships, a total surpassed by only one other brand in the entire history of the sport. Jack Nicklaus, arguably the greatest golfer who ever lived, built much of his legendary career swinging MacGregor equipment. So the next time you spot an old MacGregor iron at an estate sale, or find a dusty set leaning in the corner of your grandfather's garage, you are holding a piece of a story that started with wooden shoes in Ohio and ended up shaping the game of golf itself. A company that once employed thousands of skilled craftsmen tested its equipment on its own private course and outfitted the greatest players of a golden era quietly faded into the background of a sport it once ruled. If you enjoyed learning about the forgotten history behind MacGregor Golf, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We dig up stories like this one every week, the great American companies and factories that shaped everyday life and then disappeared from memory. You won't want to miss the next one.